This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Now, I normally wouldn't start out a show with a statistic, but I read this one recently in the New Yorker magazine, and it really floored me. Annual precipitation in Vermont, so rain and snow that falls in Vermont every year, that's increased 6 inches in the last 60 years. To me, that number, 6 inches over 60 years, is both shocking and completely mundane. I mean, think about how much the climate has warmed since the 60s and all the flooding Vermont's seen in the last 15 years alone. Of course, our annual precipitation is going up. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? Flash floods can be incredibly deadly, as the recent disaster in Texas showed us all too well. And yet, we continue to build and rebuild in flood-prone areas. Here in Vermont, though, there is a lot of groundbreaking work that's being done to prevent rivers from overflowing their banks. That's the subject of a recent deep dive in the New Yorker magazine by John Seabrook. His piece is called, "In an Age of Climate Change, How Do We Cope with Floods?" John has been a contributor to the New Yorker since 1989, and he became a staff writer in 1993. He lives part-time in Vermont and joins us today from our studio in White River Junction. John, welcome to Vermont Edition.
Thank you, Michaela. I'm a big fan of Vermont Public.
Thank you for being here. One of your local guides in your reporting was Kevin Geiger, who's the chief planner for the Two Rivers-Ottauquechee Regional Commission, which is based in Woodstock. Kevin is also joining us this hour. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, and listeners, we are so glad to have you as well. You can call in with your thoughts on this conversation at 800-639-2211. You can also send us an email to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Maybe you recently read John Seabrook's piece in the New Yorker and have questions for him. Or maybe he discussed your town and you have additional thoughts. Again, that's vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. So, John, you have been in Vermont during all the major floods dating back to 1973. Why did you decide to write about this subject now?
Yes, I have the distinction of being so old that I have experienced the floods going back to 73, which was the first year we bought the property in South Woodstock. It's always been in the back of my mind. Before I thought about writing it, I was just struck by how little waterways around our property, which is in the hills, turned into these raging torrents at certain times, completely changing their character from bucolic to scary, really. And a transformation struck me, and I always kind of wanted to burrow into it. And then, as you mentioned in the intro, since Hurricane Irene, we've had these devastating series of floods, and now the last 3 years in a row on the same day, Vermont has been struck by bad floods. So it seemed like the time. It's really a crisis, and then when the Texas event happened, it gave the piece kind of a different perspective, different places, different development eras, but some interesting parallels between the two. So that sort of was the journalistic occasion for the piece.
Yes, I was wondering if the flooding tragedy in Texas in early July changed the course of your reporting, or did you decide to start writing this story once that happened?
Well, editors thought that I had already written the story, but it turned out that I really hadn't. And then Monday morning after the Texas floods, I got a call from David Remnick saying, "Can we please have that piece?" And so it became kind of a braided narrative, as we say in the biz, between the Texas sort of horrible tragedy and then, but a background of less fatal, less disastrous disasters in Vermont that kind of informed some of the decision making in Texas. The lack of alert awareness. One of the great stats I thought from the piece was that Texas is the very last state in terms of ignoring alerts, emergency alerts, and Vermont is the very first state
Right.
in paying attention to emergency alerts. That tells you, I think, a lot about both the mindset and the experience of flooding and related disasters in Vermont. People just, at a certain point, you become it changes your mindset, and that's something Kevin is very good on. How it sort of it requires believing in the flood, which was kind of the central concept in the piece.
And since you brought up emergency alerts, now is a good time to highlight Vermont's VT alert system, which sends you rapid notifications about urgent local issues. And you can customize it based on where you live, what types of alerts you'd like to get, and whether you'd like to get them to your email or phone or carrier pigeon another way. You can sign up for that by searching VT alert. Kevin, I am curious to hear, as a regional planner, as somebody who focuses so much of your work life on how we cope with floods here in Vermont, what was your initial response as you saw the flooding in Texas start to play out? Did this seem like something that was very far away and different from what happens here in Vermont, or were you seeing those parallels too, like John was describing?
The flash nature of it, we don't have quite to that extent, but the kind of the thing that I see in so many floods is like, oh, how could this happen? I was watching that news conference that John referenced in the article, and nobody could have seen this coming, and you're like, no, you totally could have seen it coming.
Yeah.
And so that part always frustrates me when I see these predictable events happen, and then people are all surprised out there. And maybe the layperson should be surprised, but the professional emergency managers should never be surprised.
Right. It compounds the tragedy in a way.
Yeah.
And Kevin, as Vermonters know, we have a couple tough anniversary dates of our own that hit in July when the flooding of 2023 and 2024 hit. And we also had some flooding on those same dates in 2025 this past July. Where are we exactly in the flood season of this year? Are we still in a high-risk time?
Yes. My family kind of says that I'm constantly in a high risk time, but we could have these severe thunderstorms, just summer thunderstorms that set things off, or we could get a tropical remnant if there is a tropical system out there. But yeah, no, anytime now we could be getting it, but they're never a surprise. You get an alert. So if you get an alert, pay attention and put your ears up.
And John, your story talks about the growing unpredictability of flooding. So, keeping in mind what Kevin says, that flooding is going to happen. We can't always guess exactly when, but we know it's coming at some point. There is this unpredictability and increasing frequency as well due to climate change. Can you give us a big picture sense of how flood risks are changing in our corner of the United States?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, when they think of flooding, think of inundation flooding, which is the kind of flooding that a hurricane does to a coastal city, where you see people in waders walking around days afterwards and power boats, driving through the streets. Those types of floods are fairly predictable because the storm is slow moving and it takes a while to get there. And it also takes, the media can get into place. So they become these kind of major televised events, and because they're televised, I think people think, oh, well, that's what a flood looks like. Mountain flooding is a completely different animal. It's much less predictable, particularly now that you have these very moisture-laden clouds, because of man-made climate change, that have more water and more potential for rainfall at a greater rate in them, and can changed what used to be, sort of a pretty scary thunderstorm into a major disaster. Those types of floods are increasing because of the moisture in the atmosphere, and they're not as well prepared for. A lot of people have moved to mountainous regions as climate refugees, and thinking they're escaping coastal cities and the flooding there. And as I say in the piece, I think some people are kind of reluctant to admit they've traded a devil they know for one they don't, because the flooding is much less predictable, and of course the water is moving much faster than in an inundation flood. So there's a potential to get washed away. And then, the houses, instead of getting just kind of soaked, get torn away as well. So, even though the area that the flood spreads over is much smaller than in an inundation flood, so maybe the total bill is greater in a hurricane-related flood, but the level of destruction and the extreme violence of these storms. And it's not just, here in Vermont, you've seen the same storms in North Carolina. You saw them in Valencia, Spain. It's something that's getting more aware of. But as Kevin told me in the piece, which I really took and ran with, we don't practice for these kinds of floods. As natural disasters, they really more resemble wildfires or tornadoes in the speed with which they develop and move, and the limited time you have to get out of the way before something truly awful happens. We practice for wildfires. Kevin, as he'll tell you, spent some time as a firefighter. We have fire departments. We don't have flood departments. So there's just kind of a level of denial. And then you get into, we haven't talked about it, but we could, the way FEMA calculates risk with 100-year flood, plains. Gives one a person who lives in that area a unrealistic sense of, well, if it happened this year, I'm good for the next 100 years, which is definitely not true.
Yeah, Kevin, can you help us set that up for us? We hear often about these 100-year floods, and that concept has sort of been getting debunked over the last couple of years here in Vermont with what we've seen. Yes.
Yes. So the so-called 100-year flood is really the 1% annual chance flood. So think of it as a 100-sided die, which you roll each year, and maybe you get it. However, that flood frequency is based upon old data, really data that from the 60s and 70s earlier. And that is not the data that's what we're having right now. So they're in the process of recalculating those flood curves to give us new data. And there's a lot that suggests that the so-called 1% flood is more like a 2% flood or a 10% flood even. And so people need to be aware of that. The other thing about the maps, of course, is that they are only on the bigger rivers and bigger streams. And so if you're on a small stream or even just a drainage way that doesn't have any water in it, I have seen a house ripped in half by a valley that has no water, that has no stream.
Wow.
In Vermont. So, and I mentioned earlier about the flash floods. We don't have them to the extreme that the desert areas have them, but we do. During Irene, I know people, when the fire department knocked on their door and said, "Get your pets, go," when they came out of the house, they were into water. So the other thing that the Texas article made me think about is in a flash flood warning, which is what they had, and they actually had a flash flood emergency, which is even worse. Don't look to see what the river's doing. If you see the river rising, you're too late. You got to go when it's still low.
Go when it's low. Good catchphrase. And yes, when we come back from a short break, I want to talk a little bit more about how people can prepare for floods in the short term, as well as some groundbreaking work that's going on in Vermont to change the way we think about managing our rivers and streams. But first, we're going to take a short break. This is Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. A recent national study by the First Street Foundation found that floods previously considered to be 100-year events have become, on average, 62-year events. The study also found that for Vermont's Washington County, more than 4,800 properties are at high risk of flooding, but fewer than 1,500 of them are in FEMA's flood hazard zone. With these high risks in mind, how do we better prepare for flooding in the age of climate change? If you're just joining us today, our guest is the New Yorker staff writer John Seabrook. His recent article explores the groundbreaking work being done right here in Vermont to prevent flooding and erosion, now that climate change is making extreme precipitation more and more common. We're also joined by Kevin Geiger, a land use planner with the Two Rivers-Ottauquechee Regional Commission in Woodstock. You can join the conversation as well by calling in at 800-639-2211. Now, John, you write in the article about how last year Vermont mustered the political will to pass the Flood Safety Act. And this is going to give the state jurisdiction over all streams and rivers. It's going to go into effect in 2028. Can you describe for us at a macro level what will change about how Vermont's rivers will be managed and how that's unique compared to other states?
I'm delighted to, yes, because it's really a fantastic law. For many years, Vermont rivers and streams, like other states, have been channelized, which means that they're confined to a channel that is armored by riprap, which are broken pieces of rock, other types of armoring. It's often dredged, and the reason for that is that it aided in commerce. If you're transporting something on the river, or it provided more power for mills, and then as properties were built alongside the rivers, it was necessary to protect those properties by reinforcing the sides of the river. The problem is that rivers don't like to stay in one place. That's not what rivers in nature do. Everyone who's taken an earth science class knows that rivers like to meander. So when you stop rivers from meandering, you cut the river off from all these floodplains that, in between the meanders that could absorb some of that water as it's coming down and won't therefore transport it all down to the city at the other end of the river that's going to get inundated, the way Montpelier did. And so this new law that's called the Flood Safety Act gives the state the jurisdiction to manage the river as a corridor, not as a channel, which means that within the historical meander pattern of the river, which you can tell, the geologists can tell us what it is, the state will control the river and allow the river to meander, even if it cuts into land, private property owners' land. The state will have the authority to let the river do that, and it's the first law of its kind it's at the state level. There are other communities that have tried it on a more local level. I think Vermont is a perfect state for this to be implemented because it has this terrible problem, but it's small enough that everyone can get together and get on board with it because you need people, in different places in the watershed and in different watersheds to agree. So we're going to see what happens, but it's set to go into effect in 2028, as you mentioned.
Kevin, how do you expect the Flood Safety Act to affect your work?
Probably every day. I'm something called a certified flood manager, which is a national accreditation. So we help all of our towns write and deal with flood regulations. And right now, that has largely been just the FEMA floodplain regulations. And we also do river corridor bylaws as well. But as you said, this law will mean the state will just be doing river corridor bylaws for everybody on a state system. The other thing that the law does is it will enact a kind of a floor for the local regulation under the FEMA rules. So, and they're trying to figure out exactly what those, the specifics of that will be. But a lot of this will be towns calling us and landowners calling us and people wanting maps. The FEMA maps are not great to get to. So we try to do things to make them easy to find and that type of stuff. And then there's all these terms. You're in the river corridor. Well, what does that mean? And because the FEMA stuff's all about your height, because you're going to get above the water, whereas the river corridor is you want to be away from the water because it's going to come over and get you.
Well, let's take a call here. We have Walter calling in from Ripton. Walter, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi. I just think that all this talk about expanding our floodplains in Vermont, and I don't hear people talking about having beavers help do that. Where I live, before some beavers moved in a few years ago, during heavy rain events, I'd have literally a 2 to 4 inch high, 100-foot wide wall of water coming down toward my house. Once the beavers came in, and they have dams now, I have not seen that wall of water ever since. And they are nature's engineers. There was a dam building project in Czechoslovakia that before they could even start building the dam, beavers moved in, and the engineers that were building the dam said the beavers did a better job controlling the floodwaters than a man-made dam would. So I wish people would talk more about beavers, because if you get them up in the headwaters of the rivers in the mountains, they slow down the water.
Walter, thank you so much for calling in. If you would like to learn more about beavers and the work that they do shaping our ecosystems, I urge you to check out our full hour of Vermont Edition on beavers from March 6th. I learned a lot. And Walter, I believe you called into that one too. I know you know a lot about beavers out there in Ripton, so thank you. And Kevin, what Walter's describing is in part what you're saying too about how we are trying to maybe learn as humans how to let rivers do their thing rather than shaping them so that we can do what we want to do. Yeah?
Yes. Yeah. Every time you squeeze the river, you're going to pay a price, because basically that energy doesn't dissipate. It just goes somewhere else. If it can't go sideways, it goes down. And it incisors the channel, as we say, and that's how we saw some bridges kind of like hanging up in the air. But generally, it's going to go sideways. And as Walter said with the beavers, there's a saying: it's you want to slow it, spread it, and sink it. So that's, you always want to kind of get the more you can get the water out and away and hanging out, the better. And to do that, you just, where you can, don't confine the river, give it room. But we have enormous amounts of historical confining out there. Virtually no stream, unless you're out in the middle of the woods, is what it naturally was.
In the article, John, from the New Yorker that we're discussing today, you bring up a topic that is a sort of a pet interest of mine, which is buyouts. Revealing myself as a big nerd, if that's one of my pet interests. But one of the statistics in the article really surprised me. It said that only 200 property owners in Vermont have taken buyouts since Tropical Storm Irene in 2011. And a buyout, briefly to explain, is when the federal mostly and the state government will pay you for your house so you can get out of a floodplain. Only 200 property owners since 2011 have taken the government up on this offer. Why is that number so low?
Well, there's limited funds for buyouts, and as you said earlier, a lot of the at-risk properties in Vermont aren't in the FEMA floodplain maps, so they might not be able to get a buyout even if they wanted one. Also, FEMA only pays pays less than the full value of the pre-flood value of your house. 75% in some cases. And then where are you going to go? That's the other thing. You have to kind of connect this problem with the housing shortage problem in Vermont. A lot of people live by the river because that's where it's cheapest because of the flood risk, really. And so, you're talking about kind of rezoning and then you also that's where a lot of the business is as well along the river. People operate businesses, and the reason they're there is because the road is there, and the road's there because the river is there. So, a buyout isn't just a simple thing of oh, you want a buyout? Here's a buyout. Kevin can talk about this because he works with folks on it. And I don't know, there's maybe also an attitude that I'm going to stay and rebuild. In Texas, you certainly are hearing that. I think that's after a disaster and a natural response is, say we're not going to be defeated by this. There's a sort of element of surrender maybe involved in accepting a buyout. So those are some of the reasons I think that there haven't been as many as there should be.
Kevin, I'd love your thoughts here, too, on why that number of buyouts in Vermont has remained relatively low despite the relatively high number of flooding events we've had in the last 15 years.
Well, I helped manage, along with the Vermont Emergency Management, all of the buyouts after Irene, and that was roughly about 150. And then we've had a scattering since. But as John's right, the money to do that comes from the disaster itself. There's been no permanent pot of money from FEMA or anybody else to do buyouts in between in these smaller events and that type of stuff. For example, the July 10th event this year in Sutton, there's not going to be any money after that event for buyouts. But the state was able to put some money into a pot to do buyouts over the last probably 5-6 years or so. And so there's been a steady cadence of them. But John's right. You can't get FEMA money for a buyout unless you're in a FEMA mapped flood zone, for example. And those maps are not always correct, especially on these small streams at all. And then you have to meet a cost-benefit test, so it becomes difficult to buy out a really expensive place. And as John said, I think a lot of people, it wasn't that bad, and then they think, oh, it's not going to happen again. Wherever we found a place that was literally destroyed, I don't know of any where they weren't bought out.
I think it's also important to reiterate the struggle that many people have in Vermont to find somewhere else to live, because after there's a buyout, that land can't be redeveloped as housing ever again. I remember a conversation we had with Berry City's manager. Berry City being only a couple square miles, and when there are buyouts, that takes away space from the city for housing, and it removes part of their tax base as well.
Yes. Yeah. And so I understand the reluctance to lose property taxes. And like all regional planning commissions in the state, we work on the housing issue a lot. And that's very much on our minds is this a structure that just gets wet? Is this a structure that the basement fills up? Or is this a structure literally at risk of getting ripped off and thrown down the river? And there's so many gradations of that depending upon where you are. But it's obviously if the structure is going to be in danger, nobody should be being there, because it's an unsafe place to be.
Well, Kevin, you said in this article that John Seabrook reported that we are nibbling at the problem we face here in Vermont by doing buyouts and floodplain restoration and moving bridges, projects like that. First, John, and then Kevin, I'd love to hear about some of the more pie in the sky, massive projects that could make Vermont really flood safe in the future if we could dream big here. John?
And, you've got downtown Montpelier, Winooski, Waterbury to a certain extent. Really, you're going to have to move a lot of the city away from the river. Major infrastructure. You've got road. I mean, one of the disconnects in Vermont is, yes, you have this very progressive state policy now, but at the very local V-Trans level, you still have Vermont is also a state where the old-time way of doing things is valued. For example, after floods, you often see big knots of dead trees collected in the river, and really those trees are acting as kind of a flood barrier. But they're removed and the river is dredged because that's the way it's always been done, and that's the way rivers are supposed to look in a lot of people's minds. So, you really pie in the sky would be like getting everybody on the same page, and so that like the planners and the river scientists don't have to feel like they're beating their heads against the wall when they try to get the local road crew to stop reinforcing the bridge that was eroded in the last flood. And then that just kind of extends out to, a lot of people are affected by floods because the culverts wash out. And that's how we're basically affected, is we get cut off from town because the culverts wash out, because the culverts are engineered for certain, time frame, 25-year floods, whatever, that are now also all out of date. So you're really and I don't know, Kevin knows, maybe there's something like 5,000 culverts. I mean, there's tons of culverts in Vermont.
If I had $1 for every time we talked about culverts on Vermont Edition, we wouldn't need federal
Culvert
funding.
City. I know, it's like the Culvert State. Maybe that could be the license plate. And so you've got to change all of that. Anyway, that's pie in the sky thinking it's going to be very expensive, but ultimately kind of what you need to do.
Kevin, if you had one pie in the sky wish other than changing our license plates to say the Culvert State, what would it be?
State. I think a rational plan to chew at this problem, which is going to take us a long time, but it's going to take significant amounts of money. And at least with the way things are going right now at the federal level, it's not going to come from the feds. It's going to come from the state. And so you're going to have to go get not millions and not tens of millions, at least hundreds of millions and eventually billions of dollars to do this. That's those big numbers, I know. But that's what it takes. It's, there are culverts, there are bridges, there are buyouts to be done. There's floodplain restoration, which is really good. And sometimes you can do that on buyout sites where you give the river room and you go, okay, we're going to scoop this land. I call them all scoopy projects. We're going to scoop this land back and give the river a little room to go. But the amount of filling we have done and channelization in the past, which we've been doing for hundreds of years, is vast. And so we should not underestimate the situation. I don't find that daunting. That just means you got to know it going in and be realistic. But it's certainly doable. But we have to stop making the problem worse by filling in channelization where we have options.
Well, this conversation of flooding has spurred many calls and emails. And if we didn't get to you today, please do send us an email to Vermont Edition at vermontpublic.org. As we've heard from this multifaceted discussion today, there is lots more to talk about when it comes to flooding in our region. And I'm sure we will return to the conversation very soon on Vermont Edition. John Seabrook is a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine. His article that we were discussing today is called "In an Age of Climate Change, How Do We Cope with Floods?" You can find it in print and online. John, thank you so much for joining us today.
This has been great, Michaela. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. And we're also joined by Kevin Geiger, land use planner with the Two Rivers-Ottauquechee Regional Commission based in Woodstock. Kevin, it's great to talk to you again.
Thank you. And I encourage folks to work with their regional planning commissions.
All right, we have to take one more quick break here. And if you are feeling peckish right now for whatever reason, stay with us because we're talking food news in just a moment with 7 Days. This is Vermont Edition. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. When you are craving takeout or have a night to go out to dinner, do you often find yourself, like I do, going to the same place over and over and over again? I mean, you know what you're going to order and it just feels safe. Well, today we're going to help you bust out of your restaurant rut with some new ideas from Jordan Berry. She's a food writer for 7 Days, and each month she or one of her colleagues joins us for an update on food and beverage news from across our region. Jordan, it's good to see you.
Hi, Michaela. Thanks.
And if you have had a delicious meal recently and want to shout out a local restaurant or food truck or farm stand, give us a call at 800-639-2211. Now, before we get to openings and closures, Jordan, I want to talk about Laundry Day Takeaway.
Yes.
Can you tell us about what this place is and the exciting event that its chef just partook in?
Yeah, so less of a place than a sort of ethereal pop-up business,
Ooh.
I will say. Laundry Day Takeaway is Chef Abby O'Sullivan's pickup business. She offers pre-order Cajun Creole cuisine. So she spent a lot of time working on movies as a costume designer, but is from Burlington. And in that movie work, she found herself in New Orleans, and that's sort of become her second home. And so she decided when she moved back to Burlington to bring that cuisine here for us, lucky us, and makes incredible po' boys, fried green tomato po' boys recently, and red beans and rice, which is where the name comes from. So Mondays in New Orleans have historically been known as Laundry Day, where you gather all the things that you got dirty all week and spend the day washing them. And red beans and rice is something you can put on in the morning and just leave. And so it's sort of the idea of like you don't really have to think about cooking, which is why she wanted to do this pop-up business. So Abby headed down to New Orleans last weekend to cook in the Great American Seafood Cook-Off.
I'm so thrilled that a Vermonter from our little landlocked state was part of the seafood cook-off.
Yes. And actually someone from Tennessee won it. So you don't have to be from a coastal place to win the seafood cook-off. Abby did a great job. She cooked a mussel dish that sort of combined local Vermont farm food and flavors with some Nepali flavors to highlight our new American community here. It sounded like a lot of fun, and I think everyone should put an order in from her when she gets back in a couple later this week, maybe early next week. I think she's enjoying some party time in New Orleans for now.
Well, congrats to Abby O'Sullivan. Let's take a call here. We have Joyce calling in from Hubbardton. Joyce, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi. One of the places we've discovered that we really like is called West Coast Taco Stand, and it's out kind of in the country on Route 144, kind of on the way to Fairhaven in that area. And it's when it first opened, it was, people went and so on, but now people have gotten where they really like it, and it's become kind of a destination little taco stand. And just recently somebody put in a soft-serve ice cream truck there, and they really accommodate even people with different, lactose intolerant or gluten-free stuff, and they accommodate however you want your tacos or your taco salad, and just really go out of their way to make it really good. And so we'd really like to promote it because it's been a great addition just to run out and get a quick, easy meal nearby. It opens like Thursday through Sunday, I think, or something like that.
And that's West Coast Taco Stand. Joyce, thanks so much for highlighting that business. Jordan, have you heard of this?
I've driven by it. I've never stopped, and now I will. I love that recommendation.
Great. Well, if you have a recommendation of a place you've had a great meal recently, you can call in at 800-639-2211. Jordan, one of the other stories that I've read in 7 days about the food and beverage industry recently that I really enjoyed was about a former dairy farm in Hardwick that is being revived, not for dairy, but as a distillery. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, High Drive Distillery. It is the most beautiful hilltop farm you would imagine, kind of on a road that used to have 6 dairy farms. And now, I think I said in the introduction to the story, there's one and one that is a distillery. And brothers Nick and Taylor Meyer took over their family's dairy in the early 2000s, and they then transitioned it to organic production and actually won awards for 10 years in a row for the highest quality milk in the state, but it just wasn't making money. And they're very innovative. They've done, sunflowers for biodiesel. They have a beef operation. So in 2019, they sold the herd and bought a still. Jokingly said that they had to flip a coin to see who was going to tell their parents that they had made that business decision. But they've turned the former dairy barn, the milking parlor, into a beautiful distillery. They have a gin on the market. I tried it at Juniper here in Burlington. The bar manager there, Kate Wise, always tells me when there's something new and exciting. And when she vouches for a product, I listen and I go. I went over and she had made it into a crimson and clover, which is a daiquiri variation made with coconut water, perfect for hot summer days. But Nick and Taylor, they were thinking about what they knew how to do when they weren't going to have a dairy farm anymore. And they were already growing grain for the, various things they were feeding the cows. So they've switched to sort of heirloom varieties of corn. They showed me one that was called Bloody Butcher that was this like deep, beautiful red. And they're going to make bourbon and rye, and they have the gin on the market already. And the gin, one of the botanicals in it is the Vermont state flower, red clover, which already kind of grew in their fields. So something nice to connect it to what they're doing. And they're planning to not grow beyond what they can grow on the farm. So everything in their products is grown by them. They call themselves farmers first, then distillers.
So from a dairy farm to a distillery, that's a pretty big change. There have also been some other local places that have changed hands recently, changed ownership. El Gato Cantina, Palmer Lane Maple, of the storied Maple Creamy in Jericho. Can you tell us about these shifts?
Yeah, I'll start with El Gato. That was the Essex Junction location. The Burlington one closed, I think, last year. And longtime owner Tree Bertram had an employee who had taken over and really developed their food truck business. And when she was looking to semi-retire, she sold him the whole thing. So Javier Zerko he's added a side menu with new dishes, lots of entertainment and kind of late night offerings, which are unusual, especially in Essex Junction. And that building that it's in is actually planned to be demolished. So he's looking for a new place in Essex Junction for that within the next 2 years, but also to bring back a Burlington or South Burlington location for El Gato. So exciting things happening there. And then, Palmer Lane, I got to go interview them in person, which is always the best because I got to have a creamy.
Love it.
But Dan and Jessica Phelan bought the maple shop and creamy business from its founders, the Palmers, on July 1st. They haven't changed anything, and that's the plan for now. Dan used to be the GM of the Windjammer in South Burlington, and he's just really learning the business. The Palmers are still on board, helping him learn everything, and he's, trying his hand at twisting creamies and all that stuff. So go get the maple with maple sprinkles. That's my order there. So,
okay, while we're talking sweet things, anybody who knows me well or even glancingly knows that I love candy, specifically anything like gummy and sour and fruit flavored. And that means that I really want to know more about this place in Stowe that is selling Swedish candies. Can you tell me what's going on?
Yeah, it's a third location for the Cork Crew. So they've had a natural wine shop and wine bar and restaurant and market in various locations around Stowe for a long time and sort of led that wave of natural wine. And they added a candy shop. Yes. And it's all like natural dye, amazing. Swedish candies are like just so fun. You think Swedish fish, but like the ones that actually come from Sweden that are, elderflower or blackcurrant flavored or whatever they might be. So definitely, check Cork Market Candy Castle, I think is the name
I will
of it.
be there. The show ends at 1. I'll be there as soon as I can, Cork. What are some, in this realm of sweets, since I think a lot of us are still in like creamy focused time when it comes to consuming calories, are there any other places that have some good dessert news for us?
Yes. One of my favorites, Offbeat Creamy, was at the Myers Pool in Winooski for years, really built a huge following for entirely plant-based creamy and ice cream scoops. And they took a short break and they've reopened at Uncommon Coffee in Essex, which is such a beautiful space. It looks like a library in there. They have great seating and it's just a really cool partnership. They call themselves business friends, the two owners that have developed cool new businesses for us. And it makes total sense to put ice cream and coffee together.
Yes,
because you get things like affogatos and cold brew floats. And since they've reopened, Offbeat has also added ice cream flights. So if you don't just want one scoop of delicious plant-based ice cream, you want 6, you can get them and try all their flavors. I think it's meant to share, but it also kind of sounds like a challenge.
Yes.
And then down in Bristol, Holy Halva, which is halva's a Middle Eastern maple or sweetened sesame snack, a kind of tahini-based crumbly thing. And Holy Halva's is maple sweetened, so it is a Vermonty version. And they've had a production space in the old Smoke and Lola's, Jones the Boy, Almost Home little market space for a little while. And they recently opened with creamies that you can get their delicious sesame treat on a creamy sundae. And I haven't made it yet, but I have friends that live nearby that are calling it very dangerous.
Quote, very dangerous. That sounds delicious.
Yeah.
We're getting some more culinary shout outs in our phone lines. Let's go next to Tess, who's in Underhill. Tess, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I'm in Tunbridge, and I just wanted to give a little shout out to some of the local Central Vermont Upper Valley things happening here. First, I wanted to give a shout out to Hurricane Flats, which is a farm in South Royalton. They do a lot of amazing things. People might know them particularly for their popcorn corn, but they also have an excellent farm stand, which is open, I think, 10 till 7, which is great, Wednesday through Sunday. So check that out. And then also, I have to say something great about the Farmer's Hand, which is in Brookfield, Vermont. It's part of Thousand Stone Farms. It's all straight from the garden onto the table. It's a casual place with really good pizza, and you're eating right on the farm. So it's just a real treat to go there. They also make their own cider, so it's a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you so much, Tess, for those recommendations. I know you're a cider lover, Jordan.
Their cider is amazing. Yes, go try it.
Let's go next to Justin, who's in Sutton. Justin, go ahead.
Hey there. I just wanted to give a shout out to Javier Bills, which is in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. It's Lauren Jenks and her husband, Casey, and they're doing awesome tacos and quesadillas and sort of specializing in some pretty awesome tequilas, really the authentic stuff, and tahini-dipped watermelon.
Ooh, that sounds perfect for summer. Justin, thanks for shouting it out. Javier Bills in St. J. Have you been there?
I haven't been. I know that they have Almost Authentic in their name, which I really respect.
That's great. Call it like it is. And then very briefly, Jordan, today's a Tuesday, which means that a new issue of 7 Days is about to come out. Can you give us a little sneak peek of what readers can learn?
Yes, we have very exciting news coming from Randolph. Atlas Conchas, which is a microbrewery from New York City that got tons and tons of national press in a kind of very short 1-year run for their Mexican conchas, which are like a sweetbread with a crackly shell-shaped sweet crust on top. They have moved to Vermont, and they're going to relaunch their bakery at the Chelsea Farmers Market at the end of August. So big popular bakery from New York City serving Oaxacan sweetbreads that we don't really have here that much. Definitely someone to look out for. And they're using kind of unsifted, full inclusion grains, they're called, so like whole wheat, but not in the kind of way that whole wheat gets bad rap. So wonderful thing to look out for at the Chelsea Farmers Market.
Oh, I cannot wait to try that. Yeah. Jordan Berry with 7 Days. Thank you so much for joining us, and as always, for making me very, very hungry.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that is all the time that we have for today's show. Tomorrow, I just want to give you a quick heads up. If you have heard of the 251 Club or you're a member, that's what we're going to be chatting about tomorrow. So I won't say more now, but you know who you are, 251 Club. Write in or call in and tell us about your experiences traveling to all of Vermont's 251, well, technically 252 cities, towns, and villages. Today's show was directed by Aaliyah Papes. John Ahrens is our managing producer. Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro are our producers, and our intern is Callie Canucksearl. Today's call screener was Rick Barrett, and our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch up again soon.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.